Praise be Jesus Christ, and welcome back to episode 26 of CarmelCast. CarmelCast is a production of the Institute of Carmelite Studies Publications. For more information, you can visit our website at www.icspublications.org. Today we're joined by Brother John Mary of Jesus Crucified, and welcome back to Brother Emmanuel of the Mother of Mercy. I'm Deacon Pier Giorgio of Christ the King. And as we've been doing throughout this season, we're starting with a selection from the Sayings of Light and Love. So, Brother, John Mary has graciously picked, I'm sure it'll be a great one.
So this is number 100 from the ICS version of the Sayings of Light and Love of St. John of the Cross. The Father spoke one word, which was his Son, and this word he speaks always in eternal silence, and in silence must it be heard by the soul. And I think this is particularly beautiful. We don't hear a lot about John's Christology, his understanding of Jesus. He speaks a lot about Jesus, but you can see in this how central Jesus is for him. And I love this idea of it's in silence. God spoke this word in silence, and it must be in silence that we receive it. And I think that this applies very much to this section of John's life that we're going to be talking about, because he spent time in a hospital and then in a monastery that was pretty secluded and silent. And it's the same way I think that we ourselves must receive Jesus Christ. His love is by taking time in silence.
And John can be such a great teacher in that, and as we see from the way he taught his own friars,
That was one among the virtues that he was most renowned for. Not just the things that he imparted in his writing in terms of the importance of silence, but the memory of the friars of Holy Father was his silence.
And what you touch on, I think, is very important, because it's neglected, but he is so present. Jesus Christ in John's writing is so present. We don't see it, but his entire way of seeing the spiritual life is incarnational. It's very important to keep that in mind.
So where we left off last week, John made a daring escape from the Caus friars in Toledo. He makes his way through the sheer grace of God and divine providence to the nuns in Toledo, and it's there that the nuns see the full extent of the condition that he's in, and they feed him, they hide him from his pursuers, and ultimately he's brought to a hospital. But perhaps before we get to the hospital, we can talk about the nuns in Toledo have written memory of John's arrival at the monastery.
Yeah, he showed up very clandestinely, of course, and of course he wanted to be hid, because he knew that the Caus friars and the ones who were holding him would very much be looking for him. They would know very early on in the morning that he was missing, and so they brought him. Well, he came to the monastery, and immediately the priors knew him well. Very slyly, very cleverly brought him into the cloister to minister to a sick nun, and in that way he was hid from anyone who came to look for him.
And then the friars, they realize that he's missing, so they come searching, and they come to the cloister, and they ask if they've seen John of the Cross, and the sister at the turn very slyly answers, like we said, it would be a miracle if you found a friar inside here.
Yeah.
And so she was able to say that without lying, but to kind of turn them away, because they went off and were looking everywhere for John.
Yeah.
And it's in this instance that we find another item that John enjoyed to eat. So if you're looking for a feast to prepare for the upcoming solemnity of St. John of the Cross, we have moldy breadcrumbs, stewed cabbage, and acorns, and what the nuns provided for him. In this instance, for dessert, we have stewed pears with cinnamon. So a delicious meal to prepare.
You can just imagine John arriving. He's just so, his habit is torn. He's like skinny and just pale. He looks deathly ill. and they just want to take care of him and make him, help him feel better. But they also realize that he's very delicate, and so they knew pears and cinnamon would be something that would be very light on his stomach. Yeah. They didn't make a mistake or anything like that.
Simple. Yeah, and I think it's also really important to him, right, that as far as I remember, that these nuns were the first ones to hear his poetry, that he spoke it, from his own memory, what these rich expressions of his experience. They were the first ones. And I'm sure that they write about it. They remember it so clearly.
Right.
So the prioress in Toledo gets in touch with someone, the canon of the cathedral, to provide John with a place for convalescence, and we know that he spends about 2 months in the hospital. So maybe we just briefly touch on that.
Yeah, we don't know much of anything about that time other than that he was there, staying at this hospital, and I think that reveals too, like the terrible physical condition that he must have been in if it took him 2 months, and yet even we'll see he still wasn't recovered. So this is just 2 months basically for him to remain hidden and to try to get his strength back.
I do remember also that the possibility that he would have actually had view of the window that he climbed out of, and just to have taken that time not only to convalesce but to really sit with the experience that he just went through, the 9 months that he just and how much that would have been a fruitful time for him in a way to realize the great grace that was poured out for him.
Yeah, a memory from the other side of the window.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then meanwhile, all the friars are out looking for him, and he's right there in their midst, staring at the monastery.
So he's in convalescence for these 2 months, but it's pretty quick back to business. He's not fully recovered, of course, but he wants to get back into the action of the reform, and so he travels to Almodovar. In October of 1578, just 2 months after he escaped from the Caus monastery in Toledo.
Yeah, he goes there for it's basically like the reform is having a sort of secret chapter together. They don't want the other friars to know about it. So John travels for that, and it's quite a distance from where he was. And so actually we see that Teresa writes in one of her letters, she's upset that that he had traveled so far when he was so ill.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just shows a deep love that she had for him. Yeah.
So the result of this secret chapter is that John is then sent from Almodovar to El Calvario, which is quite an unusual place for John because it's in the south of Spain, and it wasn't agreeable with John for many reasons. But from what we know of, I never having been to Andalusia, but it's much warmer than in the north of Spain, and also is culturally very different. This is the part of Spain that was much more influenced by Islam during the conquest and that existed during the Middle Ages of Spain. So just culturally very different.
Yeah, it seems clear that they wanted to move John there to get him away from kind of all of that was happening, because he was right in the midst of all this tension. And so this was a way that they could send him far away from the friars who were looking for him and just all the conflict, and give him time to recover.
Yeah, he was out of the jurisdiction of anyone who might order him back.
Right. Yeah. But like you said, that was a difficult place for him to live because of the cultural differences, which I think it's helpful for us to see that, because I think at times we have troubles when we move somewhere new, being in a different place and a different culture. But even a saint, it was difficult for him to adjust to a new place. He writes in a letter to a directee of his, he says, "For after that whale swallowed me up and vomited me out on this alien port." So he's referring to being down there in the south of Spain and what that was like for him.
And it would be a long time where he would stay, but this was a tough time for him, and eventually he does come to appreciate the people, but at first, it's very difficult.
And it's also his reintroduction into the apostolate. We know that he spends some time with the nuns in Beas during this time as well.
Yeah, there's such a great memory of him going there on his way to El Calvario, and it's when I think he meets Anne of Jesus for the first time. She was the prioress. She was, one of the daughters in Saint Teresa's reform, and he meets with these nuns. He's speaking with them, and of course, the speaking of Teresa of Avila comes up, and so he speaks and he says that he calls Teresa his daughter. And Anne of Jesus is not a fan of this, because here you have, Teresa is John's like 30 years, almost 30 years older than him. And she's the founders of their reform, of their monastery. And here's this young friar saying, my daughter, Teresa. And so at first she was a little put off by John, but later on, John totally wins her over. Teresa writes to her too, saying like, how great John is. So.
Yeah, she says this is not only that he's great, but that he is the father of her soul.
Right.
Which is quite an approbation.
Yeah.
And that Carmel, these nuns became very dear to him. I mean, over the next years, he would visit them very often, and it's during this first visit actually that it's very very beautiful encounter. Him having come from this tremendous experience of suffering, but also of growth, that the nuns sort of to offer him some recreation, they sing him a song about like suffering and pain, but the great joy that can come from it, and he's just overcome. It says that he puts up his hand and says stop.
He's so moved by this. He tells him not to go on.
Yeah.
So we can see how he's still psychologically and spiritually, I think, processing all that's happened to him over the last months.
So his relationship with the nuns in Beas would continue throughout his time in Andalusia, and he was at one point making the trip to the monastery almost every weekend to spend time with them, and so we know from the nuns' encounters with him that he was such a great listener to them and such a great spiritual father to them as well. One of my favorite anecdotes from this period is the Sister Catalina asking him, why the frogs always jump away when she approaches, and John's response to her was that she should imitate these frogs and flee from creatures and rest in the center of God's love.
Right.
Yeah, because John was going there, I think when he was in El Calvario pretty much every week. I don't remember exactly how long of a walk it was, but he would leave, and it says he would walk up kind of to the top of a mountain, rest at the top, pray some, and then walk down into Beas, minister to the nuns over the weekends, and then come back to the monastery. But it's from this time too that we get some of these sayings of light and love, because some of the nuns there were jotting down these wise sayings that John said, and in a notebook that we were able to get.
One of the only legitimate autographs that we have of his writings. Go ahead.
Well, so we know that he spends about a year in El Calvario before he makes his way to Beza. So maybe we can spend the rest of our time today just talking about a different view of John from his ministry in Beza as a formator and as the one of the main superiors of the house there as well. His prudence in dealing with the more worldly matters that he had to deal with as the rector of the formation house, and some of the other ministries that he had while he was in Beza.
Yeah, so this is a time of many stories and many encounters, and a time where John really kind of flourished. I mean, in certain ways, an ability to speak with many different people and to recruit and to really nurture and nourish the guys who were entering, but also because Baeza was a very flourishing town. It had an incredibly religious atmosphere, thanks to the former reforms just recent before that.
Yeah, and he was only there for 3 years, but we have pages and pages of stories, accounts of the influence that he had there on the young men who were entering the order, the students, the other friars, and then also just the lay people in the town. Because John was really, he was the, a founder of this house, basically. He was kind of the one who was going to found this new monastery. And so he had great influence in that area. And people really started to look up to John, see his spiritual wisdom.
Yeah, and so I think we're going to share just maybe an anecdote or two from this time. I jump ahead. I love this. There's a particular story of it's from the year 1580. I can't remember during what time, but there was a great sort of plague or influenza, I guess, going through Spain, and it actually also took his mother. But in Baeza, he came back to the house and found almost all the friars were sick, or no, all of them, I think. And
he 18. I think.
Yeah, 18. And so he flew into action and sought to take care of every single one of them, to the point where I think he's even said that he bought like a quarter of a cow to feed them, where he would and with other sick friars he would ask them, what's your favorite food? Please tell me what's your favorite food so that I can make it for you. Or bringing in music, to allow them to recreate. I particularly chose the story because I found it shows a very warm side of John. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. There's great stories of him. He was called on often to minister whether it was someone was having ecstasies or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
He was seen as one who was very wise and could read souls and could kind of judge these experiences to know if they were from God or not. He was also called in to be an exorcist at times. But there's one great story of this holy woman, or appearing to be a holy woman anyways, who would come to his masses, and she was having ecstasies while he was saying mass, and was being rather disruptive. And so he told one of the other brothers to take a bucket of water, and when she started having this ecstasy, to throw the water on her, and then they would know, because if it didn't affect her at all, then they would know this was authentic. But sure enough, when the water's thrown on her, she just kind of goes off, and so they know then that she was faking all of this.
Yeah.
We see different accounts of his sense of humor too during this time. There's the story of Brother Juan of San Pablo, and how he was a lawyer before he entered the Carmel, and he asks Holy Father John to maybe he could have some more advanced reading. And so St. John of the Cross gives him a book of ABCs. You can only imagine, sort of like the equivalent of the Hungry Caterpillar today, and asks him to read this every day for his intellectual exercises, just to teach him the humility, but also shows a little bit of Holy Father's personality.
And then it turns out that the friar ended up receiving great spiritual graces from reading this book. So by being obedient and humble, he was able to receive a lot.
Yeah. And not to multiply stories, but he was because it was a big university town. St. John of Avila beforehand was one who started these reforms, and so there were many like well-known or knowledgeable people who would often come to see him once they developed this reputation, and he would spend a lot of time talking to them about scripture and theology, and I know like maybe just care of people in the city, and so he was kind of the figurehead of this very revered community in the town.
Right, he had the lowest and kind of the poorest people coming seeking him out, but also kind of the most well-known figureheads at the university town coming to him for spiritual advice.
Yeah.
So in the midst of John's living in Baeza, we know that he continues to visit the nuns in Beas. But what's going on in the Reform at this time? So we've just been speaking of sort of John's reintroduction into the life of ministry in the apostolate, and bringing people to a greater spiritual life through his teaching and ministry and confessions. But what's going on with Teresa and the rest of the Reform during this time?
Yeah, the friars are really, they're seeking, and Teresa wanted this as well, they're seeking to get their own separate province. Because right now, because they're still just a group within the bigger Carmelite order, there's still all these conflicts happening, and there aren't great relationships. And their plan at the beginning was not to form this separate order necessarily, or even a separate province. They just wanted to be these reformed houses. But eventually, I think Teresa even was able to see that this just was not going to work. There was just too much tension and jealousy and misunderstanding. And so they saw that they needed to become their own separate province in order to be protected. And so that's really what they're working towards. And also we see there's huge growth, like very quickly. This is only, I think, 13 years after the beginning of the friars, there's already 300 friars and 22 monasteries. So it's like this, it's growing so quickly that you can see that like God's really at work in this.
Yeah, and logistically, you can't. It's hard to ignore 300 friars, and the nuns too, Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. So
We know that a friar who had another profound influence on Saint Teresa was Father Gratian, and we haven't talked much during these episodes about sort of John's relationship with Gratian and to what extent John had an encounter with him. Maybe this would be a good time to bring that up because at this time Gratian is given more authority among the Discalced reform.
yeah, they seem to be peers in one sense, but Gratian from the get-go seemed to have a bit more of a career in administration. John was elected prior, different houses, but Teresa right away saw Gratian as this sort of prodigy he's going to be the one who's going to really bring up the reform in its beginning. But they did have John and Gratian seemed to have a good relationship, and even in the founding different houses like Baeza and others later on after Baeza, they worked together.
Yeah, so Gratian becomes, and this is in 1581 that the Discalced become their own separate province, and they have their first chapter in Almodovar, and it's there that, is that right?
Alcala.
Was it Alcala?
Yeah, Alcala.
And it's there that, thank you for fact checker. It's there that Teresa submits 3 names of people that she think would be good as the first provincial, and John's name is not on that list, but Gratian's name is, and he's the one who ends up being the first provincial of the Discalced province.
Yeah.
And of course, Father Antonio's name is on the list too, but we know that Teresa isn't the fondest of poor Padre Antonio. I think anecdotally, it's interesting to mention also that in the end, Fray Antonio would be the one at Teresa's bedside when she was dying. So after all of her hesitancy concerning Fray Antonio, he's the one who's with her in the end, and
Yes.
and perhaps that unsettled her a little bit, but.
And perhaps this just came to mind, but that Teresa may not have put John's name forward because she knew to what extent he was run down by his his experience, his imprisonment and everything, and I'm sure she knew what it was like to be in administration, how exhausting it is, especially in this time.
Yeah, I also like to think that she saw that John's gifts were so much in writing and like guiding souls,
Right.
and she wanted him to be free
Yeah.
for those ministries as well, and let others take care of the paperwork.
Yeah. Exactly.
So through this period in John's life, I think we've done justice to his personality, especially, and his apostolic zeal in bringing people to a closer relationship with God, his relationship with the nuns, and his relationship with the student friars as well. Just all these great anecdotes and stories that really, I think, do a good job of coloring a color commentary, you could say, on John's personality and who he was as a person. We know a lot from this period, and so next time we'll continue along in John's life and ultimately getting to a little bit about him as an author as well in the future. So we thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks. God bless. Hey everyone, Brother Pier Giorgio here. Thanks for checking out this episode of CarmelCast. If you want to hear more of us, don't forget to click subscribe. Also, be sure to click like if you enjoyed this episode, and maybe even leave us a comment. We post discussion questions down below to get the conversation going. Want more information on Carmelite spirituality and the Discalced Carmelite saints? Then you'll want to check out our website, www.icspublications.org. There's a link in the description of this episode. From here, you can see all our current promotions and access our complete catalog for the writings of St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Therese of Lisieux, St. Elizabeth of the Trinity, and St. Edith Stein. If you want to stay up to date on all our promotions and new titles, then be sure to add your email to our email list. There's no better way to stay up to date on the latest Carmelite publications. Thanks for joining us, and may God bless you.